don't know if anyone here has had the uncomfortable misfortune to maybe be in a hospital room, sitting or standing within a small company, hear a doctor or someone come in and give the news to the patient. The diagnosis is not good, and what's going on here is going to be terminal. It's hard to receive those kinds of words when you're looking with hope. I mean, I've had a bunch of doctor's appointments this past week, and I know many of you, several of you are struggling health-wise, and you go to a medical facility with hope, with some anticipation, and not trepidation. You want to go there with some kind of hope that maybe they can do something for you. But imagine if the words that you receive when you get there for this healing from a physician, and all that they can tell you is it's soon to be over. And how people respond is quite varied, different, but it's certainly not news we want to hear. For those of you that are visiting, we certainly appreciate you being here so much. Unfortunately, the way the sermons have worked this year, because we're preaching through the book of Matthew, there are a lot of things that will be said today that rely a little bit on the past sermons that I've taught. And so that's part of some of this you might not get. But as you read through the chapter here in Matthew 20, there is a change of tenor. There is a change of circumstance, and it's about to get really serious. Jesus had just finished up teaching his apostles about how you ought to be servants and how you ought to serve. We talked about that last week. But things are getting very, very serious. And verses 17 through 19 are some of the most serious that you'll hear in the Bible. And they were given to his disciples. And by the way, you'll notice in verse 17, this is not something for the general public. Evidently going from Jericho down to Jerusalem, or up to Jerusalem as it is, because of the topography. When you go up to Jerusalem, he's called his disciples aside. These are the 12. They're listed there in several places in the New Testament. These are the specific and unique guys that were just really close to Jesus. And he sets them aside away from the rest of them. This was a private message. Okay? This was one which they should have understood well, even though back in Matthew 16 they were struggling with it, because when he talked about it the first time, of course, Jesus, he tells them, I'm going to be crucified, go to Jerusalem, and Peter, pulls him aside and said, no, don't worry, Master, we're going to take care of it. I got a sword and all that kind of stuff. Now, get behind me, Satan. You don't see things like God does. And so here again, we find this turning point, but this is not just the announcement of it. This is the introduction to it. Here in the middle of chapter 20, what I would like for you to look at, and you're going to have to rely a little bit, and for those of you that are guests, my apologies, but if you'll look at the parable that Jesus told, what you're going to see is Jesus enact that parable in his actions. He practiced what he preached, and what he did is give us an example. And this to me is the consummation of it right here. This is the theme, the focal point, the pivot point in the chapter, where he tells them, I'm going up to be betrayed. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be treated horribly. And the third day again, I'm going to rise. Now, at least in this pronouncement, there is a positive. Although when you think about the positive that he mentions in the last part of verse 19, the third day he will rise again, they had no clue. It's interesting, if you look at the parallel context in Luke 18:34, it states there that they just had no clue. They still are struggling. In fact, it's important to understand the Luke passage, 18 and 34, in order to go on with what happens beginning in verse 20. But what is amazing to me, as is always the case with Jesus, all the way to the cross, when right before he says it is finished, he has the presence of mind in the pain and the suffering that we'll talk about in later lessons, to look down on people, some of whom are mocking him and just saying terrible things about him, and say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I'm amazed at how Jesus responds to people for whom he came to die. Very often we look at our neighbors and friends and we see their, simple-mindedness, I guess, the total absence of thought about their hereafter, and we wonder, what are they thinking when they do these kinds of things? Not only are the consequences in this life going to be rough, but if they keep doing this, they're not going to make it to heaven. What are they thinking? And yet Jesus leaves us an example of how he never gave up, teaching, training, trying to help those who needed the help. He tells these 12 this private thing. And it's during the course of this, or right at the conclusion of it, that it's interesting how it's stated, because in Matthew, it says the mother of Zebedee's sons, which is probably Salome, if Mark 16:1 might be brought into the text. And she was there at the cross. But the sons of Zebedee, on the other two accounts, Mark and Luke, are the ones credited with this. But evidently they got, and I understand, they got Mama to come up to Jesus and ask for this, because who's going to rag on Mama? Nobody's going to pick on Mama, okay? So we get her to say, but this is James and John who's asking for this. And before we get too critical of their request, because their request was, hey, when you come into your kingdom, we want to sit one on the right, one on the left. Okay, those are honored positions. They knew very well what that was. And they got Mama to kind of front for them and come in and ask for these honored positions. And all it did really was betray the fact they had no clue what the kingdom would be like. You know, it's about this time, instead of "Get thee behind me, Satan," that Jesus could have just ripped and tore them and asked them, as he did on one occasion, we just fed 4,000, we just fed 5,000. Why are you asking me, about bringing food to eat when I just made food for everybody to eat? Where is your faith? He doesn't do that. You see, Jesus understands that, for all the teaching that he has done, they still are struggling with the concept of the kingdom. That's not unusual, because people today are still struggling with the concept of the kingdom. There are people who teach that the kingdom has not yet occurred. They teach that when Jesus came to set up his kingdom, such a surprise, he was rejected. Can you believe it? Like God didn't know what was going on. And so in lieu of the kingdom, which he could not establish, he set up the church as a go-between. And then he's going to come back someday through a rapture and a 1,000-year millennial reign, and he's going to set up his kingdom on this earth, even though Jesus told Pilate, my kingdom's not of this earth, never will be, never was, not going to be. And yet people are still waiting for the kingdom when it's already here, according to Colossians 1:13. So, the point being here, these two guys didn't get it yet. And where Jesus could have reprimanded them for the weakness of their mind, he did not. He was patient, and he tried to help them understand, very gently teaching them that, you're going to have to go through it when you get into the kingdom. It's not going to be an easy road, and that's another difficulty we have with people who think when they begin to be Christians, everything's going to be great, and it's going to be cherry and rosy, and all things are going to be nice, and that's not the case. When you decide to become a Christian, you will be persecuted. All the righteous will be persecuted. And he's telling them that here in verse 22 and 23, you're going to have the problems that I had. And lo and behold, that is borne out in the rest of the history and through the epistles of the New Testament. These apostles went through the same kinds of things that Jesus did. I mean, after all, they chased Paul out of the city, stoned him once, left him for dead. They stoned Stephen, and they did that job good. Killed Stephen. They crucified Jesus, and Jesus told them, if you're going to be a Christian, it's going to be a tough road. And that's what he's telling them here. But Satan is no fool. I mean, he's evil, he's horrible, but he's not stupid. And what greater coup could Satan have had if right as Jesus is beginning to go and die for the world, that he could cause strife and dissension among his chosen 12. What greater command would he have of the human factor that's involved in spreading the gospel? If you start a fight right there in the middle of it. So not only did Jesus have to explain and try to help them once again understand the kingdom, but he also had to stop a fight, because in verse 24 the 10 heard it, and of course they were displeased with the brothers. We don't really like you thinking that you're somebody and you ought to be on the right and left hand, and where are we going to be? Which is ironic, because at the Last Supper, it was John who was laying on Jesus' breast. I don't hear about James, but John was there. And John was called the beloved disciple by his own recording in the Gospel of John. There was some substance before we, get all over John, before we get all over James and John, before we get all over their mother for fronting this little question. There was some substance to this. As a matter of fact, Jesus had those who were close to him. He had 3 guys that he took with him when he ascended and came back in the Transfiguration, Mount Transfiguration. It's not wrong to have good friends amongst the church. What's wrong is to have good friends that are so good it causes rift between our other brethren. That's where it goes wrong. I may have told you this before, but I had a great deacon who in Jacksboro was just one of the most humble men you'd ever know. And I wondered, after I'd been there 6-8 months, we got pretty close. But I noticed every time I came into the church building, and he was there and several others, he didn't hardly talk to me. Oh, he'd say, "Hi, Jeff, how you doing?" And then walk on, and, he'd be busy with everybody. And so I asked him one day, I said, "Tom, why is it that everywhere in the world you're my best friend, you're just right there with me, we shoot the bull, we just enjoy things, we get in the church building and it's like I've got leprosy or something, it's something contagious." He said, "Wise deacon," he said, "Well, Jeff, I get to see you all the time. You come out to the ranch, shoot pigs, you come out and visit with me at my house, you come to my shop and we see each other, we talk all the time. When I get to the church building, I haven't seen other brethren, I'll see you this week. But being a deacon, a servant, I'm going to put aside my favoritism I have for you," which I'm just pleased as punch that he thought so much of me. "And I'm going to go visit other people I don't see and encourage and help them." Now, what a wonderful attitude somebody has. I mean, we're still to this day best friends. We bug each other all the time. We know the perfect buttons to push to just, insult each other at the right time. He's that close. But you know what? I know he is serving as a deacon because he knows what Jesus was talking about here. You don't allow our personal love for each other to get so much in the way we don't use ourselves as servants in the Lord's kingdom. We're not going to create some kind of division. And that's what Jesus was trying to put down right here. And so how does he do it? Well, he teaches them what he is about to do when he starts washing their feet. And here's what he tells them. The Gentiles, everybody normally in this hierarchy of how we live, the ones on the top always look down their nose at the ones on the bottom, and that's not how the kingdom works. You see, the very request of being on his right hand and his left hand is not something to be desired. We shouldn't look at ourselves and want to be the center of attention in the Lord's kingdom. To the contrary, we ought to be so much involved in servanthood. Here he tells them in the parable in the very beginning, you need to serve. Here in the second part, he puts it in practice, and that's what you find in the very next few verses. Jesus, put this in its context. Jesus is going in, the next chapter, we'll talk about that next week, he's going to prepare the Passover, which he represents, by the way. But anyway, that's next week. But he is starting the process. He is going to be taken in, mocked and ridiculed, and if that's not enough, abused physically in a degree that you and I can barely handle if we were to see it in a movie depicted. I don't know whether you've ever seen Mel Gibson's movie about Christ. There are some things in that movie where I don't agree totally, and it's wrong, but there are some things that are pretty graphic, that are pretty close, and when you look at the scene where Jesus and the character is being abused, it's real close. Makes me sick to my stomach to see it, to know my Jesus, my King, my Savior, went through that for me. Because I can't speak for you, but I ain't worth it. I know me, and I ain't worth it. And the grace by which I am saved will never be replaced by anything that I can function as a meritorious work. It won't happen. I'm saved by grace. I'm saved by what Christ did for me. And I will do everything in my power to do what he tells me to do, because if we love him, we keep his commandments. We don't bicker about whether or not the commandments save us or not. That's not the point. No, we have to do what he says, but that's not the point. He saves us by his grace. He's about to go through this. One of the most excruciating deaths ever. Why, when somebody's standing on the road, "Oh, Jesus, help me out here." "Look, dude, I'm fixing to go to the cross. I ain't got time for you." And that's not how Jesus responded. That's not how he responded. Now, I will point out, which I believe is critical in anyone's understanding about where you stand with Jesus. Jesus doesn't come down into your soul miraculously and save you, and you're just somebody special in that regard. In fact, that's never been the case. In Matthew 7:7, Jesus tells us point blank, we have to have the initiative. You go seek. You go knock. If you don't do those kinds of things, you're not going to find Him, okay? It's on you. He has provided everything that is necessary for us to be saved, but if we don't go to Him, it's not going to happen. He ain't going to come in as receiving Jesus and the popular dogma of religion today. Come into our lives and just save us because we're somebody special, because we're not. It's interesting to me that in verse 32, here's two blind men, mind you. Look at the context. They're blind men. They can't see, okay? They can hear, but they can't see. It says, Jesus stood still and called them. You know, there is not one single time that I can find in the Bible where Jesus is pursuing somebody and grabbing them by the coat or the sleeve, the arm sleeve, and saying, oh, come on, please, come back, come back. No, never happens. In fact, I think we get a misconception going when we talk about evangelism and doing work for people. Folks, we plant and water. We don't convert them. God's the one who gives the increase. Our job is not to increase. We don't worry about that. What we do, plant and water. And that's what we need to be busy about all the time. Because if someone has the right heart, they will seek Christ out. And so Jesus, in this example, as consistent as He was throughout His entire life, you come to me. Yeah, I know you're blind, okay? But if you want to be healed, you come to me. And so they came to Him, and He asked what He wanted. He said, we won't be able to see. And so, in this context particularly, in verse 34, Jesus had compassion. That exists yet to this day. I don't know where you are. I don't know what you have going on in your life, and we all have things going on in our life. I mean, Pete's out there attacking tractors in the tractor one. You know, we all have issues in our life. I know some of you going in and you're hoping to hear something good about a surgery that may be coming up, or you're hoping that a doctor can fix you. And I understand those things cause us some anticipation, a little trepidation, a little afraid. We're looking forward to something good. But you know what? There is no reason whatsoever, if we're going to be like Jesus, that anything in our life, whatever we're looking ahead of and what's coming up, there's no reason we still can't do what Jesus has asked us to do. There's no excuse for it. So in the parable He tells about the guys who are hired at different times of the day. I don't care what time you was hired. That's not relevant. What's relevant is when you are hired and you get on the staff and you're working for Christ, that you work. You do your job, and there's no excuses for it. We're so used to, in our society, giving excuses. In fact, we get to a point where it is never culpability on our part. We always have a reason why we did whatever it was that was wrong. We did it, but there was a reason why. Why? It goes back to the immaturity of myself and my little brother, because it was always my little brother's fault. Well, it really is the other way around. Anytime I did something, I blamed it on my brother, and my brother would squeal on me, and so I'd end up getting spanking anyway. But it was always his fault. I did this because somebody else did thus and so. That doesn't work. We're going to stand before judgment one of these days. And it's an irony to me that there is a judgment going to come, 2 Corinthians 5:10. And we're going to be judged. And the question comes up, what are you going to be judged on? Your faith? No. Are you going to be judged on, just list a long litany of things about which people think is important in their lives. And what I see is that we're going to be judged on what we do. Jesus teaches the parable and then immediately turns around and He teaches the disciples, the special disciples He has, and then He calms the conflict that was going to arise about somebody thinking more of themselves than they ought to. And then as He's going along this road, and there's lots of people, this is Passover time, folks, the roads are heavy, thick with traffic. They're all walking, riding donkeys, such like, no Ferraris. They're just all walking and running, going to Jerusalem for the Passover. Jesus is going up there, but Jesus knows this Passover is going to be different than any one before. And He still has time for somebody who needs help. Question I would leave with you this morning. Do you have time for somebody? I know you've got stuff in your life, and I know it defeats you sometimes. It's very depressing. It causes you problems because I got this going in my life. I don't have time. No, you do. You can still be the faithful child of God you should be, no matter what's going on in your life, because Jesus gave an example. And it's motivated in verse 34 by compassion. I have found in most people's lives, you've heard his statement, if you want to get something done, get the busiest person in the bunch to assign it to them, because they'll get it done. Why is that? Because when we are busy about loving others, we don't have to worry about ourselves. I know we've got some things we have to consider, we have to plan for, we have to take into account. I understand that. But our sole source of existence in Christ is to help somebody else get to heaven. I hope this lesson will help you get to heaven by not worrying so much about what we do have going on in our lives. And we do. All of us have things going on in our lives, serious things. But there's somebody out there, and whether or not I have a good report or a bad report or have to take medicine or whatever the case may be, their soul may be going to hell because I'm being negligent of what I'm supposed to do. I would invite you to be the servant of Christ you should be. If you're not, we offer an invitation for you to become a servant or be a better servant. And whatever your need might be, we invite you as we stand.